The afternoon had been so still, so perfect, that the sudden voice felt like a gunshot itself. "Hands up! You are trespassing on private community property!" The sound ripped through the quiet air, harsh and sharp, like glass shattering on stone. My head jerked up, my heart dropping as my eyes snapped toward the shoreline. At first, I saw only the glint of sunlight bouncing off something metallic. Then my stomach turned. It wasn't just a shine. It was the unmistakable shape of a handgun, and it was aimed directly at my daughter, Emily. My blood ran cold. The peaceful day, the lake, the soft breeze, the sound of the water lapping the dock was instantly gone. In its place was terror. The woman holding the weapon was none other than Carol Peters, the self-declared ruler of this lakeside neighborhood. She looked absurd in her getup. A tactical vest stretched 2 sizes too small, wraparound sunglasses, and a cheap plastic security guard cap. She could have been mistaken for someone in a Halloween costume, if not for the very real gun trembling in her hands. For a split second, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My instincts screamed to leap between my daughter and that barrel of steel, but before I could, Emily spoke. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. My daughter, calm as a lake at sunrise, stood tall with her hands hanging loosely at her sides, her face showing nothing but stern disappointment. Her voice was steady even, commanding in its calm. "Ma'am," she said, her eyes locked on Carol's, "I need you to put the weapon down. Now." Carol let out a laugh. A high, shrill, unstable cackle that echoed off the water. It didn't sound like confidence. It sounded like madness. "I'm making a citizen's arrest," she barked, her voice cracking with wild energy. "This is my jurisdiction." What Carol didn't know, what made this entire ridiculous moment almost surreal, was that she had just drawn a gun on the wrong person. Because Emily wasn't just my daughter. She wasn't just visiting her parents at the lake. She was the newly elected county sheriff. A real sheriff, with a badge, a department, and actual authority. Carol, with her toy cop cart and dollar store hat, had no idea she had crossed the one line she could never come back from. This was the end of a long, messy saga, and Carol's downfall was going to be legendary. But if you want to know how it all came to this, how one woman's hunger for power turned a quiet lake into a battlefield, let me back up. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from, and settle in. Because this story doesn't start with a gun. It starts with a dream. For over 20 years, my wife Sarah and I had talked about a lake house. Not some sprawling mansion with gates and marble floors. Just a simple retreat. A porch with a swing, a dock sturdy enough to fish from, a place where our grandkids could splash in the water while Sarah and I sipped coffee and watched the loons skim across the lake. That was our vision. I'm a retired civil engineer, and I love the idea of having small projects to tinker with, reinforcing the dock, maybe building a fire pit, planting a few shrubs. That was my heaven. After decades of saving, planning, and searching, we finally found it. A modest 2-bedroom cabin on the edge of Silver Lake. Rustic but solid, tucked into a quiet cove. And here's the detail that would matter later, the golden key in this entire war. Our cabin was one of a handful of lots platted long before the larger Silver Lake subdivision was ever created. Our property wasn't part of their development, not legally, not financially, not in any binding way. It was ours, free and clear. We closed the deal, rolled up our sleeves for a few weeks of light renovation, and moved in just as spring thaw opened the lake back up. The first 2 weeks were bliss, sunlight flickering through tall pines, loons, returning, calling across the water. Mornings spent deciding whether to fish from the dock or paddle out in the canoe. For the first time in years, life felt exactly as we had imagined. And then came Carol. It was a Saturday morning when she made her entrance, driving a modified golf cart she had tricked out to look like a toy police cruiser. A flashing yellow light wobbled on top as she skidded to a halt at the end of our drive. She didn't park. She staged her vehicle at an angle like she was leading a raid. Then she marched across our lawn as though she were inspecting troops before battle. Carol was in her late 50s, with a helmet-stiff haircut and mirrored sunglasses that hid her eyes, but not her attitude. She clutched a clipboard to her chest like a badge of authority. "Welcome to the Silver Lake Community Association," she announced, not like a neighbor, but like a dictator making a proclamation. I stepped forward, hand outstretched. "We're Frank and Sarah," I said warmly. "Just moved in. We're excited to be here." She ignored the handshake, gave a curt nod, and swept her gaze over the property like a hawk scanning for prey. Her eyes landed on the porch swing, the freshly painted shutters, the neat pile of lumber by the garage I had set aside for a planter box. "I'm sure you are," she said flatly, as though passing us in some silent test. "I've got your welcome packet and the bylaws. Annual dues are $500, due the 1st of next month. That covers dock maintenance, snow plowing, and community security patrol." She rapped her clipboard against the ridiculous golf cart, puffing out her chest. "Which I personally oversee." Sarah, ever the diplomat, smiled politely. "That's kind of you, Carol. We actually weren't aware there was an HOA. Our realtor didn't mention it, and nothing about it was in our closing paperwork." For a split second, Carol's mask cracked. A flicker of irritation passed across her face before she quickly recovered. "Well, of course there's an HOA," she said with syrupy condescension. "How else would we maintain property values? Some realtors just don't explain things well. But don't worry, I'll get you squared away." She shoved the thick binder at me, the weight of it heavy in my hands. "All the rules are in there. Lawn height, trash can placement, paint colors, boat hours. It's all very straightforward. We have meetings the first Tuesday of every month. Attendance is strongly encouraged. Sign the membership agreement at the back and bring me your check. There's a 30-day grace period, but I prefer to get new folks on board quickly. Prevents misunderstandings." She gave us one last sweeping glare, climbed into her little fake cruiser, and zipped away with her yellow light blinking importantly. Sarah and I stood silently in the grass, watching the dust settle. Finally, Sarah said softly, "Well, she seems committed." That night, I spread our documents across the dining table. Surveys, closing papers, county tax maps, everything. And there it was, clear as daylight. Our property, along with 4 others, dated back to 1978. The Silver. Lake Subdivision and its HOA didn't come into existence until 1991. Geographically close, yes. Legally tied? Not at all. Her authority ended exactly where her neighborhood ended. The next day, our daughter Emily arrived with her husband and kids. Emily had just been elected sheriff, an achievement Sarah and I were bursting with pride over. We hadn't broadcast it everywhere, respecting her wish for privacy, but it was a fact Carol didn't know. As we grilled burgers, I told Emily about Carol's security patrol. Emily raised an eyebrow, smiling faintly. "A yellow light?" she asked. "That's right," I said. She shook her head. "Dad, that's a problem. You can't just strap a flashing light to a cart and play police. Depending on how she uses it, she could be stepping into impersonating an officer." "That's exactly what I thought," I replied. "So you're not going to join her HOA?" Emily asked. "Not a chance," I said. "We take care of our own property. If the county's slow plowing, we'll hire someone ourselves. I'm not paying $500 a year to be told what color I can paint my shed." A week later, I mailed Carol a polite letter, thanking her for the binder but declining membership. I wished her well, said we hoped to be friendly neighbors and thought that would be the end. I was wrong. 2 days later, tucked under my windshield wiper, came Carol's first shot. A violation notice. Our offense? Unapproved landscaping. Materials. She cited the neat little stack of cedar planks by the garage, the ones I planned to use for a planter box. According to her rules, all projects required approval from her so-called Architectural Review Committee, which turned out to be her and one nervous retiree named Gerald. The notice came with a $50 fine and a warning that it would double every 7 days. At the bottom, in her neat but aggressive handwriting, she had scrawled, "This is your only friendly warning. We do things by the book here." The absurdity took my breath away. She was trying to enforce rules of a club we'd never joined. It was like a bowling league trying to fine me for using the wrong kind of golf ball. I didn't argue. I simply moved the lumber into the garage, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a fight. I still thought she might realize her mistake and back off. But Carol didn't run on logic. Carol ran on something else entirely. Pure, concentrated entitlement. Her need for control overrode any sense of boundaries or legal reality. A few days later, the second notice appeared. This time for improper waste receptacle display. We had left our trash can at the end of the driveway on Tuesday morning for the Wednesday pickup, as was standard practice for the entire county. According to Carol's private rule book, receptacles could not be visible from the road for more than 12 hours prior to pickup. Another 50 fine. I began to understand this wasn't about rules. It was about submission. She couldn't stand the fact that there was a single house, a single family on her precious lake that wasn't under her thumb. Our polite refusal wasn't a rejection of her HOA. It was a rejection of her, and she couldn't have that. I started a file, a simple manila folder labeled Carol. Inside, I placed our property survey, the plat map, a print out of the county road designation, her binder, my letter, and the 2 violation notices. It was the engineer in me. Document everything, every interaction, every piece of paper. You never know when you'll need the schematics for a tear-down. The friendly warning soon gave way to a more direct form of harassment. Carol's golf cart became a constant presence. She would park it across the road from our driveway, just sitting there, sunglasses on, clipboard in her lap, watching. If we were out on the lawn, she'd watch. If I was working on the boat, she'd watch. It was a blatant juvenile attempt at intimidation. My wife Sarah tried to kill her with kindness. One afternoon, seeing Carol parked in her usual surveillance spot, Sarah walked over with 2 glasses of iced tea. "Carol, you look so hot out here," she said, with a warm smile. "I thought you might like something to drink." Carol didn't even turn her head. "I'm on duty," she said, her voice flat. "I don't accept beverages while on patrol." Sarah, a saint of a woman who could charm a charging rhino, was taken aback. She just left the glass on the ground near the cart and walked back to the house, shaking her head. The iced tea sat there untouched for 3 hours until the ice melted and the glass was covered in condensation. Then Carol drove away, leaving it behind. The message was clear. There would be no truce. The situation began to poison the very thing we'd moved here for. Peace. Friends would come to visit, and I'd have to explain the weird lady in the fake police cart watching us from the road. "Is that your neighbor?" they'd ask. Something like that, I'd reply, trying to laugh it off. But it wasn't funny. It was deeply unsettling. The next escalation came during my 60th birthday party. We'd invited about 20 people, including Emily, her family, and some old colleagues. We were barbecuing, playing music at a reasonable volume, and generally enjoying the beautiful summer day. Around 3:00 p.m., Carol's golf cart came roaring down the road and screeched to a halt, blocking the end of our driveway. 2 of our friends were just arriving. Carol hopped out, clipboard in hand, and stood in front of their car, blocking them from pulling in. I walked down to see what the problem was. "Carol, can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "There's a noise violation in progress," she announced loud enough for everyone on our deck to hear. "And you have an unauthorized number of vehicles. The bylaws state no more than 4 guest vehicles are permitted without prior notification to the association." My friend Dave, a gentle giant of a man, leaned out of his car window. "Ma'am, we're just trying to park. Is there a problem?" "I am the problem solver," Carol declared grandly. "This is a private community with rules. This is not some free-for-all party. Zone." The sheer audacity was stunning. She was citing the bylaws of her club to my guests. "Carol," I said, my patience wearing dangerously thin. "These are my friends. This is my property. You are not a member of this party, and your rules do not apply here. You are also blocking access to my driveway on a county road. Please move your vehicle." "This road is maintained by the association," she shot back, which was a bald-faced lie I could prove with a single phone call to the county works department. "And your loud music and excessive traffic are impacting the quality of life for our members." She gestured vaguely down the road where her closest member was a quarter of a mile away and couldn't possibly have heard our music. Emily, who had been watching from the porch, started walking down the driveway. She was in civilian clothes, jeans, and a t-shirt tanned looked like any other guest. She approached the scene with a practiced, easygoing gait that I knew was her de-escalation mode. "Hi there," she said to Carol, offering a friendly smile. "I'm Emily. Is there an issue?" Carol looked Emily up and down, a sneer forming on her lips. "Another one?" she muttered, then louder. "Your party is in violation of multiple community standards. I need you to disperse your excess guests and turn the music down now." "Which specific county ordinance are we violating?" Emily asked, her tone genuinely curious. The question seemed to throw Carol for a loop. She sputtered for a moment. "It's not an ordinance. It's the community bylaws. They are legally binding. They're legally binding for members of your association." "Sure," Emily agreed pleasantly. "But my parents aren't members. So again, I'm just wondering what public law you think is being broken here that would give you the authority to block a public road and detain people." The word detain hung in the air. Carol's eyes narrowed. She was used to steamrolling retirees, not being calmly questioned by someone who clearly knew a thing or two. "You're a real smart aleck, aren't you?" Carol said, her voice dripping with venom. "I know your type. Think you're above the rules? We'll see about that." With that, she took a photo of Dave's license plate with her phone, scribbled furiously on her clipboard, and then, with a final glare, got into her golf cart and moved it just enough for the car to pass. She spent the rest of the party parked in, her usual spot, a silent, glowering gargoyle. The incident cast a pall over the celebration. It was all anyone could talk about. Dave and his wife were apologetic as if they had done something wrong. I had to spend 20 minutes reassuring them that the crazy lady was, in fact, just a crazy lady with no actual power. After the guests left, Emily stayed behind to help clean up. "Dad," she said, her expression serious, "this has gone way beyond a simple neighbor dispute. She's not just annoying, she's actively harassing you, blocking the road, trying to detain your guests. That's illegal. Her belief in her own authority is going to get her into real trouble." "I know," I sighed, putting the Carol file on the table. "I've been documenting everything." Emily spent the next hour looking through my file. She read every violation notice, examined the plat maps, and scanned the bylaws I'd printed. As a civil engineer, I had gathered the what. Emily, as the sheriff, saw the how. She saw the pattern of escalating behavior, the specific statutes Carol was treading on, and the potential for a dangerous confrontation. Her whole association might be a house of cards, Emily mused, tapping the signature page of the bylaws. "Have you looked into their corporate status with the state?" I admitted I hadn't. My focus had been purely on the property lines and proving we weren't obligated to join. "I'll have one of my admin people look it up on Monday," she said. "And I'll check with the county clerk's office about any official authority she or her HOA might have claimed over that road. I'm almost certain she has none, but it's best to be thorough." She then gave me some specific advice. "Get a security camera, a good one, pointing down the driveway. "If she sets foot on your property, I want it on video. If she blocks the road again, call the non-emergency line and report it. Don't confront her yourself. Create a paper trail with the actual authorities." A week later, my new high-definition security camera was installed, covering the entire driveway and a portion of the road. I felt a little ridiculous, turning my peaceful lake house into a surveillance state. But Emily was right. Carol's behavior was not normal, and it was getting worse. The next attack was more insidious. Received a letter from the county zoning and planning department. A formal complaint had been filed against us for an unpermitted shoreline structure referring to our dock. The complaint filed anonymously claimed our dock was a new construction built without the required permits and environmental impact studies. Our dock was 50 years old. It was grandfathered in decades before the current shoreline regulations even existed. It was clearly noted on our deed and survey, but a formal complaint requires a formal response. I had to spend a full day digging out the original dock construction receipts my grandfather had saved, finding the relevant sections of the county code that grandfathered in existing structures, and composing a detailed 10-page letter to the zoning board complete with annotated diagrams and copies of historical property records. It was a massive, stressful waste of my time. The complaint was, of course, dismissed 2 weeks later, but the intent was clear. Carol, having failed at direct intimidation, was now turning to weaponizing bureaucracy. She was trying to bury me in paperwork and legal fees, hoping to make our lives so miserable that we would either submit or sell. The enablers were a curious part of the puzzle. I'd met a few of the other neighbors, the actual members of our association. Most of them were perfectly pleasant people who seemed to view Carol as a necessary evil. "Oh, that's just Carol. One neighbor, a man named Tom, told me when I ran into him at the local hardware store. She can be a bit much, but you have to admit the flower beds by the entrance have never looked better." He said it with a shrug, the universal gesture of resigned acceptance. Another woman told my wife at the grocery store. "She keeps the renters in line. We used to have problems with loud parties before she took over. They were willing to trade a measure of their own freedom for the illusion of order she provided. They enabled her by staying silent, by paying their dues, and by never questioning her increasingly erratic enforcement. Her husband, a quiet, perpetually startled-looking man named Gary, was the chief enabler. He was often seen in the passenger seat of the patrol cart looking miserable, handing Carol her clipboard or a bottle of water. He never spoke, never made eye contact. He was assailant accomplice, a passenger in her slow-motion crash. What these enablers didn't see was that the system she had built wasn't for their benefit. It was for her own ego. It wasn't about property values. It was about power. And because we had refused to bend the knee, she had escalated her campaign from petty tyranny to outright malicious harassment. But her escalation was a mistake. She was no longer just a nuisance. She had declared war on a civil engineer and the county sheriff. She was bringing a clipboard to a gunfight, and she didn't even know it yet. The pieces were being positioned on the board, and her checkmate was coming. The anonymous complaint about our dock was the turning point. It shifted my mindset. From passive defense to active offense, Carol had moved beyond simple harassment into what is legally termed malicious prosecution, using legal systems to harm someone without merit. This was no longer a game of notes and glares. This was serious. I called Emily the day I got the letter from the zoning board. Her response was immediate and steel-edged. "Okay, Dad, she's crossed a line. This isn't just an HOA dispute anymore. She's filing false reports with a government agency. That's a crime." The information Emily's admin dug up was the first critical blow. The Silver Lake Community Association, according to state records, had let its non-profit corporate status lapse 18 months prior. They had failed to file the required annual paperwork and pay the nominal fee. Legally speaking, the association didn't exist. It was a phantom entity. All of Carol's actions, collecting dues, levying fines, signing contracts for road maintenance, were being done under the name of a defunct corporation. This was more than just bad bookkeeping. It bordered on fraud. "So all those dues she's collecting," I asked Emily over the phone, "where are they going?" That, Emily said, her voice grim, is the $64,000 question. She likely has a bank account in the association's name, but if the corporate entity is dissolved, she has no legal authority to spend that money on behalf of the community. She might be commingling funds or just treating the HOA checking account like her personal piggy bank. The puzzle pieces were snapping into place. The over-the-top enforcement, the obsession with dues, the resistance to any oversighted, all pointed to a person protecting a secret cash cow. Our refusal to join wasn't just an insult to her ego, it was a threat to her income stream. We were a loose thread that could unravel her entire tapestry of deceit. Our next step was to find an ally on the inside. This proved easier than expected. My methodical response to the zoning complaint had not gone unnoticed. The zoning officer I'd corresponded with, a woman named Maria, was impressed by the detailed documentation I'd provided. When she dismissed the complaint against us, I sent her a thank you email. On a hunch, I asked if anonymous complaints of this nature were common in our area. She replied with a carefully worded email that was practically an engraved invitation. She said that while she couldn't discuss specific cases, her department had received a statistically unusual number of anonymous complaints originating from the Silver Lake area in the past 2 years, all targeting minor, unsubstantiated infractions. The complaints always resulted in a significant workload for her department and had never once led to a finding of a genuine violation. She was, in short, sick of Carol's games. The final piece of the pre-confrontation puzzle came from an unlikely source. Gerald, the terrified-looking retiree who served as the other half of the Architectural Review Committee. I saw him one morning, at the post office. He looked even more stressed than usual. I approached him cautiously. "Gerald, isn't it?" "I'm Frank from the corner lot." He jumped a little, looking around as if Carol might materialize from behind a stack of shipping boxes. "Oh, hello," he mumbled, clutching a stack of letters. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry if my planter box project caused you any trouble," I said, keeping my voice gentle. I wasn't aware of the rules. Gerald's face softened with something that looked like guilt. "It wasn't any trouble for me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It thought the planter box looked nice." He looked around again, then leaned in closer. "She just makes the rules up as she goes along. You know, there's supposed to be a vote for fines, for new rules, but we haven't had a real meeting with a quorum in over a year. She just sends out emails saying things have been passed." "And the dues?" I asked, my voice low. "The road plowing? The dock maintenance?" Gerald sighed, a deep, weary sound. "The plowing guy, his contract wasn't renewed last winter. She said she found someone cheaper. But then we got that big storm in February and nobody came. She said the new guy's truck broke down. We were snowed in for 3 days until Tom and I got our snowblowers out and cleared the road ourselves. The community dock has a rotten plank that my wife almost fell through. I've told Carol about it 3 times. She says it's on the repair schedule. Bingo. This was the smoking gun. Carol wasn't maintaining the community. She was gutting it. She was collecting fees for services she wasn't providing. It was a classic embezzlement scheme hidden behind a thin veneer of HOA tyranny. It hanked Gerald for his time and told him that, if he ever felt like things were getting out of hand, he should know he'd neighbors who would support him. He just gave a sad, defeated nod and skewered away. I immediately called Emily and relayed the conversation. "It's embezzlement, Dad. She said she's using a defunct corporate name to collect money for services she's not rendering. This is way beyond impersonating an officer. This is felony-level stuff. The plan we formulated was simple and two-pronged. First, we would address the civil issue. I drafted a letter not just from me, but on behalf of a concerned group of Silver Lake residents, even if that group was for now just me and the ghost of Gerald's courage. The letter was a masterpiece of professional takedown. It politely laid out the facts. The association's corporate status was dissolved. Any collection of dues or enforcement of bylaws under its name was legally void. It cited the state statutes for nonprofit corporations. Then it detailed the specific failures in maintenance, the lapsed snowplow contract, the dangerously neglected community. Docked contrasted them with the 500 annual dues being collected from approximately 40 homes. That was 20 a year vanishing into a black hole. The letter formally requested a complete financial disclosure and an immediate emergency meeting of all property owners to discuss the election of a new legally constituted board. We didn't threaten. We didn't accuse. We simply laid out the undeniable facts and made a reasonable request. I knew that once the other residents saw in black and white that their association was a sham and their money was unaccounted for, Carol's reign would be over. The second prong of the plan was law enforcement. Emily, acting in her official capacity as sheriff, couldn't just launch an investigation into her dad's nuisance neighbor. That would be a conflict of interest. But she could act on a credible report of criminal activity, especially something as clear-cut as brandishing a weapon or illegally blocking a public road. Weck knew, based on Carol's escalating behavior, that she would react to my letter with incandescent rage. She would feel her power, her entire world slipping away. And when backed into a corner, a creature like Carol doesn't retreat, she attacks. We predicted she would do something drastic, something that would cross the final line from civil dispute to criminal act. The security camera was running 247. My phone was always in my pocket, ready to record. All we had to do was mail the letter and wait for the Queen to topple her own castle. I sent the letter via certified mail to every single property owner in the Silver Lake Community Association, using the county tax records to get the official mailing addresses. I also sent a copy to Carol's P.O. box. The letters were timed to arrive on a Friday, giving the neighbors the weekend to read, digest, and start talking to each other. It was a carefully placed stick of dynamite with a very long fuse. For 2 days, nothing happened. A strange, tense quiet settled over the lake. I saw neighbors retrieving their mail, standing in their driveways, reading the letter, and then looking over toward Carol's house. I saw cars pulling into driveways and people having hushed conversations on their porches. The hive was stirring. The fuse was sputtering, getting shorter and shorter, burning its way toward the inevitable explosion. The explosion came on Sunday afternoon. It was a perfect sun-drenched day. My grandkids were visiting, their happy shrieks echoing across the water as they had a splash fight with their father, Mark, off the end of our dock. Sarah was reading on the porch, and I was admiring the now-finished planter boxes filled with her favorite impatiens. A fragile peace had settled over us, the kind you feel in the eye of a storm. Then I heard it, the angry buzz of Carol's golf cart coming in hot. It wasn't the usual patrol speed. This was a full throttle charge. She didn't stop at her usual surveillance spot. She rocketed right past the end of our driveway and swerved onto the edge of our lawn, crushing a corner of Sarah's flower bed under her tires. She slammed on the brakes and vaulted out of the cart before it even came to a complete stop. She was a woman transformed. The usual smug, controlled demeanor was gone, replaced by a mask of pure caloric rage. Her face was blotchy and red. In her hand, she clutched a crumpled copy of my letter. "You!" she screamed, stabbing a trembling finger in my direction. "How dare you? After everything I've done for this community, this is slander. This is leal." I had been prepared for a confrontation, but their level of fury was still shocking. I took a step off the porch, positioning myself calmly between her and my family. "Carol," I said, my voice deliberately calm, "you are trespassing. Please get off my property." "Your property," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is my community. I built it. I protect it. And you come here with your lies. And you try to turn everyone against me." From down by the lake, I could see Emily looking up. She had heard the shouting. She said something to Mark and started walking calmly up the lawn toward the house. She was still in her swimsuit with a towel wrapped around her waist. She looked like any concerned mom coming to see what the commotion was about. Carol didn't even notice her at first. Her entire universe was focused on me. "You think you're so smart with your letters and your statutes," she spat. "You have no idea how things work here. There are rules. I am the president. You're the president of Adafunct Corporation, Carol," I said, keeping my tone factual. "The other residents deserve to know that. They deserve to know where their $20,000 a year is going." The mention of the money sent another jolt of rage through her. It was the nerve I had known would be the most sensitive. "It's all accounted for," she screamed. "It goes to tow expenses, legal fees, insurance, things you wouldn't understand." At that moment, Emily reached the top of the lawn and stepped onto the driveway. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of polite inquiry. Carol whirled around to face her, here ye's blazing. Seeing Emily, just another member of the family she despised, seemed to break the last thread of her sanity. "You," she snarled, "you're with him. You're all the same. You think you can just ignore the rules?" "Ma'am, I think you just need to calm down," Emily said, taking another step forward, placing herself slightly in front of me. "My kids are right down there. Don't you tell me to calm down." Carol's voice rose to a hysterical shriek. "You people are ruining everything. You need to be taught a lesson." And that's when it happened. In a flash of terrifying, surreal motion, she reached behind her back to a holster I hadn't even noticed on her ridiculous utility belt. She pulled out a black semi-automatic handgun. It looked shockingly real and deadly in the bright afternoon sun. My heart stopped. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Sarah gasped from the porch. My son-in-law, Mark, who had started up from the dock, froze in his tracks. Carol wasn't just pointing the gun vaguely. She leveled it with a shaky but determined grip directly at Emily's chest. "Hands up!" she screamed, her eyes wide and crazed. "You are trespassing on private community property. I am making a citizen's arrest." This was it. The moment we had anticipated but prayed would never happen. She had crossed the brightest of red lines. For a split second, I was paralyzed by pure animal fear for my child. But Emily was magnificent. She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. Her entire demeanor shifted. The concerned mom evaporated, and in her place was the county sheriff. Her posture straightened. Her face became an unreadable mask of professional calm. She slowly, deliberately raised her hands to shoulder height, palms open in the universal gesture of non-aggression. "Ma'am," she said, and her voice was no longer polite or neighborly. It was a command. It was the voice of pure, undiluted authority that could freeze a prison riot. "My name is Emily Clark. I am the sheriff of this county. You are committing a felony. You are committing aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. I am ordering you as a peace officer to put your weapon on the ground. Right now." Carol just stared, her face a confused mess of rage and disbelief. It was clear the words weren't processing. She thought it was a trick, a bluff. "The sheriff?" she scoffed, a wild, unhinged laugh bubbling up. You're just some little in a bathing suit. I am the authority here. I am President Carol Peters." Emily's response was ice cold. "I am the sheriff," she repeated, her voice dropping a register, each word a chip of granite. "And you, President Peters, are about 30 seconds away from spending the rest of your life in a state penitentiary. This is your last chance. Put the gun down." From down the road, I could hear the faint approaching wail of sirens. As soon as Carol had pulled the weapon, my quick-thinking son-in-law had dialed 911. The reality of the situation was barreling down on Carol loud and fast. The sound of the sirens seemed to finally penetrate her rage-fueled fantasy. Her eyes darted. From Emily's face to the approaching sound and back to the gun in her hand, as if she was seeing it for the first time. The color drained from her face. The gun, which she had held with such conviction, suddenly seemed to weigh 1,000 lbs. Her arm trembled violently. I was just, she stammered, her voice shrinking to a pathetic whisper. She was trespassing. Drop it, Emily commanded, her voice like a hammer strike. Carol's hand opened. The handgun fell from her grasp and clattered onto the asphalt of my driveway. It landed with a heavy final thud. At that exact moment, 2 county sheriff's patrol cars, lights flashing, screeched to a halt behind Carol's ridiculous golf cart, blocking her incompletely. 2 deputies, young, fit, and serious, exited their vehicles with their hands on their own holstered weapons. They took in the scene in a split second. The woman who looked like a deranged security guard, the gun on the ground, and their boss, the sheriff, standing barefoot in a towel, looking completely in command. "Sheriff!" one of the deputies called out, his voice a mix of surprise and concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, deputy," Emily said, never taking her eyes off Carol. "Please secure the weapon and take this individual into custody." The deputies moved, with swift, practiced efficiency. One kicked the gun safely away and bagged it as evidence. The other walked up to Carol, who was now weeping, her body racked with shuddering sobs. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." Carol just stood there, frozen in shame and disbelief. "But I'm the president," she whimpered, as if the title was a magical incantation that should have protected her. The deputy was unmoved. "You have the right to remain silent," he said, pulling her arms behind her back and snapping the handcuffs into place with a definitive click. As they led the crumbling, weeping tyrant to the back of the patrol car, she looked back at me, her eyes pleading. In them I saw not a monster, but a deeply pathetic, broken person whose imaginary kingdom had just been annihilated by reality. Her reign was over, not with a bang, but with a quiet, final click of handcuffs. The aftermath was both swift and incredibly satisfying. The sight of Carol Peters, the self-appointed guardian of Silver Lake, being placed in the back of a real patrol car sent a shockwave through the neighborhood. My certified letters had already stirred the pot. Her public dramatic arrest was the thunderclap that followed the lightning. People emerged from their houses, drawn by the sirens, and stood in their driveways whispering to each other, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning realization. They saw the deputies, the evidence bag containing the gun, and my daughter, the sheriff, calmly giving a statement to one of her officers. The narrative of Carol as protector crumbled in an instant. The deputies who responded were the picture of professionalism. They handled the situation by the book, which was a relief to Emily. She wanted to ensure there were no accusations of a conflict of interest. She was the victim of a crime, and she acted as any citizen, who also happens to be a highly trained law enforcement officer, would. Once Carol was secured and transported to the county jail, one of the senior deputies, a man named Sergeant Miller, came to take my formal statement. He had known Emily for years since she was a rookie. "Frank," he said, shaking his head as he looked at the crushed flowers in the ridiculous golf cart. "I've heard some HOA stories, but this is a new one. Is everyone all right?" "We are now," I said, gesturing to my grandkids, who were being comforted by their parents on the porch. The fear was fading, but the adrenaline still coursed through my veins. "Thank you for the fast response. Mark's 911 call was crystal clear," Miller said. "A woman is pointing a gun at my mother-in-law, who is the sheriff. That gets your attention." He took my statement. "Sarah's and Mark's." The high-definition footage from my new security camera captured the entire incident in stunning clarity. Carol driving onto the lawn, the verbal tirade, the terrifying moment she drew the weapon and aimed it at Emily, and Emily's calm, authoritative response. It was irrefutable. There was no ambiguity, no room for her to claim she felt threatened or was acting in self-defense. The video showed her as the aggressor, plain and simple. It was the engineer's data-driven approach, meeting the sheriff's demand for evidence, and it was a prosecutor's dream. Carol was charged with multiple felonies, including aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and impersonating a public servant. The committee that reviewed her security patrol found that their modified golf cart and uniform were deliberately designed to mimic law enforcement, a violation of state law. She was also hit with a slew of misdemeanors related to the false report she filed about our dock and for harassment. Her husband, Gary, bailed her out the next day, a process that apparently drained their savings account. The terms of her bail were strict. She was forbidden from possessing any firearms and was issued a temporary restraining order that prohibited her from coming within 500 feet of me, my family, or my property. The silence that descended upon our little corner of the lake was blissful. The surveillance golf cart was gone. The constant feeling of being watched vanished. We could work in the garden, have friends over, and simply exist without the oppressive shadow of her imagined authority. But the real victory wasn't just personal. It was for the community she had duped for so long. Armed with my letter and the news of Carol's arrest, the residents of the Silver Lake Community Association finally found their voice. A week after the incident, I received a phone call from Tom, the neighbor I had spoken to at the hardware store. His voice, once full of resigned acceptance, now carried a new tone of determination. "Frank," he said, "a few of us got together after reading your letter. Gerald showed us everything. The fake meeting minutes, the unanswered emails about repairs. We feel like fools. We just let it happen. You weren't fools," I told him. "You were misled by someone you trusted to act in good faith." "Well, we're not being misled anymore," he said. "We've spoken to a lawyer. Your letter laid out the entire case for us. We're formally dissolving the old defunct association. We're starting a new one, a proper one with transparent books and an elected board that answers to the members. And we were wondering, would you consider being on the board, maybe as treasurer? We need someone who knows how to read a balance sheet." I was taken aback, but also deeply touched. I politely declined a formal board position, explaining that my whole goal was to not be in an HOA, but I offered my services as an informal consultant. I would help them review contracts for things like road maintenance, offer my engineering eye on any community projects, and help them draft new reasonable bylaws that protected property values without infringing on personal freedoms. It was the perfect arrangement. They got the expertise without the formal entanglement, and I got to be the helpful neighbor I had wanted to be from the beginning. The first meeting of the new association was held a month later in a community hall in town. Nearly every homeowner attended. They voted to formally dissolve the Phantom Association and transfer the remaining funds, what little was left after Carol's expenses, to a new, properly managed bank account. They elected Thomas the new president. His first official act was to propose a good neighbor clause, which simply stated that all enforcement actions should begin with a friendly conversation rather than a fine, and that disputes should be mediated by the board, not a single individual. It passed unanimously. They also voted to extend an official formal apology to my family for the harassment we had endured. As for Carol, her legal troubles were just beginning. The district attorney, armed with our video and the financial evidence Gerald provided, moved forward with the prosecution. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence against her, Carol's lawyer advised her to take a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to felony menacing and a misdemeanor charge of fraudulent business practices. She managed to avoid prison time largely due to her age and lack of a prior record. But she was sentenced to 5 years of strict probation, a hefty fine. Court-ordered psychological evaluation and anger management therapy, and 500 hours of community service. The most satisfying part of the sentence for me was the permanent injunction that barred her from ever serving on any board or in any fiduciary capacity for any community or homeowners association in the state ever again. Her reign in any form was permanently over. The final nail in her coffin was social. Shunned by the neighbors she had once terrorized and facing financial ruin from her legal fees. She and Gary sold their house a few months later. They sold it at a loss to a lovely young family who was thrilled to be there. I never saw Carol again. My daughter Emily became something of a local legend, the new sheriff, who in her first few months on the job had faced down a gunman while wearing a swimsuit. It cemented her reputation as someone who was unflappable, tough, and deeply committed to her community. For us, life on the lake finally became what we had always dreamed it would be. The peace we sought was no longer fragile, but solid and enduring, built on the foundation of standing up for what was right. We enjoyed our coffee on the porch, fished from our perfectly legal and safe dock, and watched our grandchildren splash in the water without a care in the world. Occasionally, a neighbor from the new functional HOA would stop by, not with a violation notice, but with a plate of cookies or an invitation to a potluck. We had found our community, after all, not by joining an association, but by dismantling a petty dictatorship and helping our neighbors build something better in its place. My file folder labeled Carol still sits in my desk drawer. I keep it as a reminder that sometimes the most peaceful view comes only after you've weathered the storm, and that no bully, no matter how much authority they pretend to have, is a match for a well-prepared engineer and a very, very smart sheriff.